The View studio was already tense before the cameras turned on. Not chaotic, not loud, just tense in the way that happens when everyone in the room knows something might go wrong, and no one's sure who will pull the trigger. Mark Wahlberg was scheduled to appear on the panel to discuss his latest film and his production company's expansion into faith-based entertainment. It had been pitched as a conversation about his career evolution, family values, and the growing market for positive content in Hollywood. But that was just the version the public saw. Behind the scenes, there were emails, conditions, and warnings. Mark's team had been very specific about keeping the conversation focused on his business ventures and avoiding political landmines. The View's producers had agreed, or at least they said they had. But just minutes before they walked onto the set, one of the producers whispered something to Joy Behar about challenging his conservative views and not letting him promote religious propaganda. And Joy's entire demeanor shifted. The atmosphere in the studio carried an undercurrent of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The familiar View set, usually designed to feel like a comfortable living room conversation, felt different today, more like an arena where gladiators prepared for battle. The lighting had been adjusted to capture every expression, every moment of what producers hoped would generate the kind of viral content that drives ratings and social media engagement. When Mark finally stepped onto the stage, the applause was warm but measured. The audience knew they were witnessing something potentially explosive, a Boston-raised Catholic actor and producer sitting across from one of television's most outspoken liberal voices. Mark wore a navy blue suit that fit his muscular frame perfectly, his appearance polished but still carrying that unmistakable working-class Boston edge that had defined his entire career. He smiled and waved at the audience, his demeanor relaxed but alert, like a boxer who knows he's walking into hostile territory. Whoopi provided the introduction with her trademark professionalism. She said, "Please welcome Mark Wahlberg. Mark, great to have you back on The View." Mark's smile was genuine, his Boston accent immediately evident as he spoke. He said, "Thanks for having me back, ladies. Always interesting coming here. Never know what's going to happen." The comment drew nervous laughter from the audience, and perhaps should have served as a warning of what was to come. Sarah Haynes jumped in with what seemed like a friendly opener. She said, "Mark, you've been expanding into faith-based films lately. What's driving that decision?" Mark leaned forward with obvious enthusiasm. He said, "You know, Sarah, I've been blessed in my career, and I want to use that platform to create content that families can watch together. There's a real hunger out there for positive stories, for content that uplifts instead of tears down." His voice carried genuine conviction as he continued. "My faith has been central to my life, especially since becoming a father. I want my kids to see movies that reinforce the values we're trying to teach at home." Alyssa Farah Griffin nodded approvingly. She said, "That's wonderful. The family film market seems to be really growing." Mark's eyes lit up. He said, "Absolutely. Look, I've made my share of R-rated action movies, and there's a place for that. But I realized I was making films I couldn't watch with my own children. That didn't sit right with me." For about 15 minutes, the conversation flowed smoothly. Mark discussed his production company's upcoming projects, his approach to balancing entertainment with positive messaging, and his experience working with faith-based audiences. The interview felt comfortable, substantive, exactly what his team had hoped for. Then Joy Behar decided to light the fuse. She said, "Mark, that's all very nice, but let's be honest here. When you talk about family values and faith-based content, aren't you really just code switching for conservative politics? Aren't you trying to cash in on the religious right?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. The comfortable atmosphere evaporated instantly. Mark's expression shifted from relaxed enthusiasm to controlled tension. He said carefully, "Joy, I'm talking about making movies that parents can watch with their kids. I'm not sure how that's political." Joy leaned forward aggressively, her voice taking on the combative tone that had made her both famous and infamous. She said, "Come on, Mark. Family values has been a Republican talking point for decades. When you make faith-based films, you're appealing to people who vote against women's rights, against LGBTQ rights, against separation of church and state." The studio tension was palpable now. The other hosts looked uncomfortable, recognizing that Joy was crossing from legitimate questioning into outright attack territory. Mark's jaw tightened, his Boston Street instincts warring with his media training. He said, "Joy, I think you're making a lot of assumptions about my audience and my motivations. I'm not making political films. I'm making films about hope, about redemption, about second chances." Joy wasn't backing down. Her voice rose with theatrical indignation. She said, "But you can't separate that from politics, Mark. When you promote Christian values, you're inherently supporting a system that oppresses other people. You're using your platform to push a religious agenda that hurts marginalized communities." That's when something fundamental shifted in Mark's demeanor. The diplomatic mask slipped, revealing the scrappy kid from Dorchester who had fought his way to the top of Hollywood. He said, "Religious agenda? Joy, what religious agenda? Teaching kids to be kind to each other? Showing that people can change and grow? Believing that families matter?" His voice carried a new edge, the kind of intensity that had made him convincing as both a rapper and an action star. "You want to know what hurts marginalized communities? It's the garbage coming out of Hollywood that glorifies violence, drug dealing, and treating women like objects. But I make one movie about a guy finding God, and suddenly I'm the problem." Joy stood up, clearly not expecting such a direct response. She said, "You're twisting my words." "No, I'm not." Mark stood too, his full presence suddenly commanding the space in a way that made everyone else seem smaller. "I'm responding to exactly what you said. You accused me of having a religious agenda for making positive content." The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Mark continued, his voice building with passion. "You know what's really funny, Joy? You sit here every day pushing your political agenda, and nobody calls that propaganda. But I make a movie about forgiveness, and suddenly I'm indoctrinating people." He walked around the table, his movement controlled but charged with energy. "I grew up in a neighborhood where kids didn't have positive role models, where violence was normal, where drugs destroyed families. You know what changed my life? Faith. Community. The belief that I could be better than my circumstances." Joy tried to interrupt, her usual quick wit seeming to abandon her. She said, "That's not what That's exactly what you meant." Mark's voice filled the studio. "You meant that teaching kids about right and wrong is somehow oppressive. You meant that believing in something bigger than yourself is political. You meant that having faith makes you the enemy." The raw authenticity of his response was overwhelming Joy's prepared talking points. Mark continued, his voice cracking with genuine emotion. "I've made mistakes, Joy. Real mistakes. I've hurt people. I've done things I'm ashamed of. But my faith taught me that I could change, that I could make amends, that I could use my second chance to help other people." He faced her directly, the full force of his conviction focused like a laser. "And you're sitting here telling me that's political? That helping people find hope is agenda-driven? That making movies families can watch together is oppression?" The studio was electric with tension. Mark's passion was undeniable, his authenticity cutting through the manufactured controversy like a knife. Joy made one desperate attempt to regain control. She said, "I'm not against hope, Mark. I'm against using faith as a weapon." "A weapon?" Mark's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Joy, you've turned this entire show into a weapon. You attack anyone who doesn't think exactly like you do. You mock people's beliefs, you dismiss their values, you turn every conversation into a political battle." He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, his movements decisive and final. "You want to know what's really hurting this country? It's not people making positive movies. It's people like you who can't stand to see others find peace, purpose, or hope in something you don't believe in." As he put on his jacket, he delivered what would become the most quoted moment of the exchange. "I came here to talk about making movies that bring families together. You turned it into an attack on my faith and my values. That says everything about you and nothing about me." The studio was dead silent as Mark walked toward the exit, then turned back for his final statement. "You know what, Joy? I'm proud of my faith. I'm proud of the positive content I'm creating. I'm proud of the kids who've told me that my movies help them make better choices." His voice carried across the studio with absolute authority. And I'm especially proud that I don't spend my days trying to tear down other people's sources of strength and hope. He looked directly at Joy one final time. Maybe if you spent less time attacking what gives people purpose and more time finding some purpose of your own, you'd be a happier person. The studio erupted as Mark walked out with his head high, leaving Joy standing alone, visibly shaken and humiliated. The other hosts sat in stunned silence. Joy attempted to make a sarcastic comment to recover, but her voice was shaky and her usual confidence was nowhere to be found. The image of her standing alone, having been systematically dismantled by someone she'd clearly underestimated, became instantly iconic. Within minutes, the footage was everywhere. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtag Mark Destroys Joy began trending alongside hashtag The View Backfires and hashtag Faith Wins. From his car, Mark posted, "Came to talk about positive entertainment. Got attacked for having faith. Nothing new in Hollywood, but always disappointing when it happens on live TV." The response was overwhelming and largely supportive. Fellow actors shared their own experiences of being attacked for their beliefs. Parents thanked him for creating content they could watch with their children. Faith communities rallied behind his defense of positive values. But perhaps most importantly, the incident sparked broader conversations about tolerance and respect for diverse viewpoints in entertainment and media. Conservative voices praised Mark for refusing to back down from his beliefs. But even many liberal commentators criticized Joy's approach, noting that attacking someone's faith was inappropriate regardless of political differences. The View faced immediate backlash. Sponsors questioned whether Joy's combative style had crossed into religious intolerance. Ratings showed a significant drop among moderate viewers who found her attack on Mark's faith offensive. At a film premiere the following week, Mark was asked about the confrontation. He said calmly, "Look, I respect that people have different beliefs. But respect has to go both ways. You can't attack someone's faith and then expect them to just sit there and take it." The interviewer asked what he hoped people would take from the incident. Mark's response was measured but firm. "I hope they understand that having faith doesn't make you political. Making positive content doesn't make you oppressive. And believing in something bigger than yourself doesn't make you anyone's enemy." The revolution wasn't just in a celebrity defending his faith. It was in exposing how certain media figures had become so politically polarized that they couldn't tolerate basic human decency disguised as entertainment. It was in proving that there was a massive audience hungry for positive content that Hollywood had been ignoring. It was in showing that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to be ashamed of your beliefs. Mark Wahlberg didn't just walk off The View that day. He walked away from a culture that had forgotten the difference between tolerance and agreement, between diversity and conformity, between respecting differences and attacking them. He proved that faith and entertainment aren't mutually exclusive. And he showed that sometimes the most powerful response to public attack is private conviction lived out loud. Because that day, Mark Wahlberg reminded everyone that believing in something doesn't make you political. Creating positive content doesn't make you oppressive. And having faith doesn't make you anyone's enemy. It just makes you someone who believes the world can be better. And in a culture that profits from cynicism, that's the most radical position of all. The man who had transformed himself from troubled teenager to Hollywood star to devoted family man gave his most important performance that morning, not as an actor, but as someone who refused to let others shame him for his beliefs. And in the end, it wasn't Mark Wahlberg who was humiliated. It was a system that had forgotten that tolerance means accepting people who are different from you. Not just people who think differently, but people who believe differently, people who find meaning differently, people who create differently, and people who choose to use their success to lift others up instead of tear them down. Because that's what real diversity looks like. That's what actual tolerance means. And that's what Mark Wahlberg stood for when he walked off that stage. Head high, faith intact, purpose clear, and dignity unshaken.